Now we're up to number 5 in our series of quilt blocks, and this is called a chain. And chain is more of a style of quilt blocks. This is a basic chain. What you'll notice is it looks like there's a chain that connects there, and if you go ahead and make a bunch of these and put them together, then it looks like that chain continues all the way down the quilt. And so with this one, it looks a lot more complicated because there are a lot more seams to it. However, what you've got to look at is it's really just a 9-patch with some sashing on the outside. And so you already know how to do this. The tricky part with this is making these points meet. So once you've got this all set, we'll put it together, and it acts like another 9-patch then. So we do a 9-patch here, and then this actually works out to be a 9-patch. And so with this, the trickiest part is just getting that last little bit, and I'll go over that a little bit more slowly. But this is just setting a regular 9-patch together. And so all of your blocks are going to be, if you follow the pattern exactly, 2 7/8, all the squares. And then this will be 2 7/8 by 7 3/4. Now, there's not really a fast way of doing this. You really have to cut all the pieces out and do it the more traditional way. There's really not a good fast way of cutting them out and things like that. So you will be cutting each piece, setting them aside, and I've already done that. And so now I just need to set them up in my pattern. And so for this fabric that I've chosen, the blues are in place of the purples. And so now I'm going to set up my 9-patch. And this is just for me to know how I'm going to sew everything together. And so I'm just laying it out loosely so that I'll know how to attack it whenever I actually start to sew my seams together. And so this is how it's going to end up looking. This is the colors as they will be put together. And of course, because all the seams aren't in there, everything looks like it's not going to fit. But once you seam it all up, it will fit, I promise you. So I've got my leftover pieces over here, and I've got everything set up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to fold this one over. And I know that these I'm going to save for later, but these I need to go ahead and piece together and do seams down each one of these sides. So let's move it to the sewing machine and get it sewn. So now I have all of my pieces ironed and this set seamed. And so now I need to do my next set. So this will be over here. Fold those over. And so we're going to do the same sort of chaining technique of just pushing them all through as a batch. And I know that this time I'm doing this seam on all of them. so now I have these two right here, parts of my sashing done. I call it my sashing because when you are putting quilt blocks together, a lot of times what you use are these little strips right here, and the way that we are putting this together acts the same way that you actually piece an entire quilt together with blocks using sashing. And so I like the idea of you guys getting to understand how it will go together later when I say put sashing around it if you want to make it a little bit bigger. And so these are still just pieces of this block, but I'm calling it sashing just to kind of get the idea into your head. The next thing I need to do is actually finish piecing my 9 patch together. So I've got this part and this part done. These will wait until later, and so the next thing is put my 9 patch together. So now I need to fold that up, and I'll line my points up, and then I'll seam down this edge. And this time I am going to actually take the time to kind of pin them together, because since we're going to have so many, oh, and I ironed that the wrong way. Since we're going to have so many seams, it does need to be a little bit more fiddly than I usually do. So I need to go re-iron this one real quick, and then I can put them back together. So I say I iron that the wrong way because I really want these to lock into each other. So these are going into the blue and these are going into the blue. And so that way those ditches will lock together nice and evenly. And I can make sure I'm getting my points just right in that center of that 9 patch. Got that part of my 9 patch, and now I'll fold this one down and I'll do the same thing, make sure I've got them, and I did the same thing on this one, so I need to go iron that one real fast. Those are going to the blues, this one needs to go to the blue too. Getting those ditches lined up so that hopefully my points will make perfect little points. They will meet up right where I want them to. And sometimes that takes a little more fiddling than others. without putting a wrinkle in it, I want to try to get that as close as possible and kind of ease that out to where they don't quite meet where they should. Anytime you're getting this close to the needle, put your foot way far away from your pedal so that you don't accidentally start it up again, because you don't want to run over your finger. It does not feel good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fold this one this way, and we're going to seam this. So we're going to put this panel together first, and then we will add these two panels on top. So I'm going to start with my right side just because that's the way I do things. You do it however keeps you sane, but we're going to start with the middle section first, and then we'll add those two later. See where these don't really meet up perfectly? For those, you'll just try to split the difference as best you can. Just make sure that you're not so far off that you have a really, really skinny seam allowance, because that will fall apart later. You want as close to 1/4 inch as you possibly can. You want to watch your seams that are under here so that they don't flip the wrong way. And so I just kind of feel with my finger as I'm going. And you can usually tell if something flips the wrong way. So now I'll put my other panel on. Sometimes the tension will get off on my machine, and I'm sure that happens to everyone's machine every once in a while. And sometimes it's just better to re-thread the whole thing. Add the last two pieces. So when you're ironing, generally you go to the darkest side, and that's how I did. The blue is actually a little bit thicker than this red, and so I went with the blue, even though they both kind of read as the same level of darkness. So I did it to the blue on here. It just happens that I did it to the blue here because the bigger issue with this one is I don't want to fold all of those seams back on themselves, because then it gets all bulky right here. And so when you have that many seams to deal with, usually you just don't worry about what color the fabric is, and you fold it to the side with the fewest seams. and so this meant folding it out to the panels here. And that comes into play when we have to put on these. So this will go down here, and I want to make sure that these are going opposite directions. So I did that correctly. And so now we'll sew our last two panels on, and we're going to really hope that my seams line up, because this is usually where the chain blocks and the larger blocks where you have a lot of seams, where they'll fail. When you have one big piece here with a lot of pieces on the other side, sometimes when you have that many seams, you'll get off just a little bit, and that's when these won't completely line up properly. So I'm hoping, and it seems like it might be really close. I shouldn't have to fudge it too much. But I'm going to try to lock in those ditches. And this one I'm really going to take my time with, so that I know that I get it as exact as I can. So there might be a little bit of a difference. We'll see how bad it is. And so, go ahead and clip this one, and then we'll go. This is where I will take my time, make sure that I'm not flipping any seams on the back side, make sure I'm coming up to this and keeping it locked in as long as I can. And really trying to guide it in there and keep it where it's supposed to be. And you don't want to super stretch it, but adding just a hair of tension to it, just a little bit, sometimes helps work things out. But if you stretch it too much, you're going to get weird waffles and waves in it, and you don't want that either. Side, very last panel, and I'm going to do the same thing, make sure that the seams are folded the right way, and line them up, get those ditches locked in as best I can. So now we're going to iron this, and we're going to see how close I got. So here's my finished chain block, and everything turned out well. I do have one point that's a little bit off, but because the chain draws your eye away from that center, you don't really notice it, so it doesn't bother me at all. And usually I'm super picky about my mistakes, but all the points here line up, and those are the ones that really draw your eye more, and so those were the ones I was really focusing on. So those turned out well. It is a little fiddly to have to sit there and cut 2 7/8 since the rulers usually don't have that as a very big number on your rulers. It's not a very common cut, but if you wanted to make it a little bit easier, you could just go ahead and cut 3-inch squares and make this a 3-inch bar, and then what you're going to do is just have to cut down this outside edge when you're done. This will make this a little bit skinnier than the squares on the inside. Now if you're making an entire quilt that is out of the chain pattern, then that probably won't look very good, because then you will notice that these squares are a little bit smaller than these squares. But if you're just doing the one, no one will ever notice that there's a significant difference at all between the squares. And so if you wanted to do 3-inch instead of 2 7/8, you can totally do that. It's completely up to you how fiddly you want to get with the cuts. But 2 7/8, make sure that everything actually works out correct in the end. And I hope you enjoy the chain, and I'll see you in the next block.